I actually mentioned this game in passing last year, and for that entire time, I really did mean to sit down and review it, and didn't. So let's make this right. What do you get when you make a monster game under the all-important asterisk that you can't fight said monsters? Well, you get today's game, I guess. Join me for a closer look into the curious tale of monster racers. Greetings, everyone. I am the Hipster Snek, and today, to kick off the merry month of monster games and to celebrate our channel's 3rd year, we're going to look at an obscure Mons title from the aughts. What are the odds? Specifically, we'll be looking at UFO and Koei's 2010 Nintendo DS exclusive Monster Racers. How this game even found its way into my library was a bit of a story unto itself. Around the same time as this game being localized, Koei and Tecmo were finalizing their merger. This may not mean a whole lot to you now, but you have to remember my fanboyish view of the situation. Just a year prior, Square, what do you mean you want us to do something with Thief, Deus Ex, and Tomb Raider, collecting dust is something, Enix had an offer on the table to purchase Tecmo in her entirety. However, that soon was withdrawn, and much more favorable Tecmo-Koei merger we know today happened instead. And that's when, among many other projects, Monster Racer surfaced. For us Monster Rancher fans, we were uncertain what to make of it from name alone. What were we to take away from this? However, it didn't take long for promo materials to surface and for it to become clear that this was an original IP, based on an interesting twist to the SMT formula of monster titles. The monsters wouldn't fight each other, but instead maintain a powerful, overwhelming sense of competition and urges to race to a finish line for superiority. This story convention led to the formation of official monster race leagues all over the world, with every continent excepting Antarctica, and with the addition of the fictional Star Island, having a circuit for racers to compete and challenge in. And this is a Mons game, so of course our little hero desperately wants to be the #1 monster racer in the entire world. And starting off on Star Island, we set our sights on winning each individual circuit the world over. So we head to the race league to receive our starter, and the race begins, unaware of the number of wild rival shady organizations and crazy monsters we'd meet along the way. But before I take off too fast out of the starting gate, let's touch on appearances. The game takes a very anime-esque presentation with cutesy monsters to gather up and race, and the humans are displayed via rather snazzy portraits. In fact, I have to give the devs props on account that, while the player avatar is a traditional silent protagonist, they do a great job characterizing them due to having very expressive portraits. Which is good, as we end up meeting some, big personalities, so that surprised portrait in particular gets quite the workout. As an interesting mechanic in the game, and I might as well bring it up now, are the rainbow assortment of orbs. When fed to a monster, not only does it boost their stats a little bit, it also expands their available color palette, and one of the most curious cases of monster customization I think I've ever seen. Given enough, not only do they get a big stat boost, but the ability for you to make them whatever color you wish, with each subsequent orb of the same color giving you the option to increase the color's saturation. Rare rainbow orbs even can be found as well, which are not only bigger boosters but give one level of color to all 7 bands at the same time. The small number of these will completely unlock the creature's color wheel. And that is on top of the game's obligatory shiny mechanic, the extremely rare exotic monsters, who not only have different default colors, but also have enhanced stats and inverted characteristics. Meaning that, say the creature is normally a fire affinity, would instead learn ice affinity traits in their place. So this is the first time in a Mons game where I've seen anyone ever do anything interesting with this gimmick. More on this later. From an audio standpoint, the music is good. It's not fantastic, and it doesn't make me contemplate my own mortality. It's in a good place, and some of the race themes in particular are quite catchy. But I've never caught myself humming them out of context. The town songs tend to be bouncy, jaunty little ditties, and the race tends to up the BPM for their duration, but I don't really recall any track blowing me away for good or for ill. So yeah, gameplay. Like any game of its type, this is an overhead view RPG with a couple of twists. For starters, your starters do not form any kind of triangle of any real sort. Instead, they correspond to 3 different types of common raceway terrain: grassy fields, fiery volcanoes, and sandy terrain. Thus, which you choose between Leafy, Feechik, and Kaboom — wow, these puns are bad enough that I could have written them — It all really does boil down to your personal preferences. Let's see, last time I did Feechik, so this time I'll pick Leafy. He looks kind of sneckish and I'll color him yellow later on. Once you have your starter, you'll be prompted to start racing right away. And here's where the RPG differs from any other I've ever played. During a race, all monsters are lined up in a 2D platformer event starting on the left-hand side of the screen, and all rush to the right. And since they're not engaged in traditional combat, monsters aren't graded by strength and defense, but rather by speed, thrust, power, and spirit. And while I'm not 100% sure on this, I can try to break these down a little bit. Speed governs, well, the obvious. I don't feel like that one needs too much elaboration. Thrust, I believe, influences their boosts, spirits help with taming wild monsters, and power helps dictate damage output. But wait, didn't I just say that monsters aren't fighting? Well, it's true that they don't have HP in the traditional sense, but you can harass other racers, either by ramming them from behind, jumping on them, or mowing them down while using a boost power-up. This will deal damage measured in some numeric value, but again, there's no HP, so you can't defeat them this way. Instead, it translates to a brief window of stun. I don't know what these numbers mean, be it frames or ticks or maybe even something the RNG just throws out randomly, but the effect is there. So we can fight for first, even if we're trailing a bit. And this gets a bit more nuanced. As I mentioned before, the field is littered with power-ups. Sometimes it's just coins, cash money for your benefit. But there's also boosts for temporary leaps in speed, specials that let your critter sail forward uncontested in a nigh-impervious blaze of glory, and more. Something akin to Mario Kart, except much less cheating. On top of that, if you're racing against wild creatures, say to grind, the game expedites the tedium by having a shutout goal before the final finish line, a mobile secondary objective that moves in sync with the wild monster. And if you clear it, the race is considered won early, as the rival just has no chance of even catching up at that point. This is a huge thing that helps make navigating the game's dungeons and wild areas much more convenient for the player. Seriously, I cannot overstate how much I appreciate this as a mechanic. However, it should be noted that in official cup races, you are obligated to clear the entire course to the very end, with all its pits, platforms, power-ups, and other decorations that may or may not start with P. And upon clearing a race, your monster are met with a reward of XP and any money collected from the course itself. You'll level up traditional fashion, and your monster will learn additional skills, which will help them in future races, including elemental-themed ones, which serves as the game's sort of elemental table. For example, fire creatures move through lava without hassle, and water critters can swim faster than they run in many cases, and so on. This gets even better because once you reach a certain point, you can even breed your monster in order to get more advantageous skill combinations. Mine eyes can but weep at the thought of how many hours I lose to monster game mechanics like this one. That aside, you're also able to recruit wild monsters. After you engage them in a race, you have the ability to fire off a star blast forward from your monster's face, and striking the opponent enough times will convince them to throw in with you for some reason. You can also maintain whatever roster of 3 assembled beasties you prefer anytime you're in a town. Now, it sounds like losing is all but impossible at this point, courtesy of your monsters not getting physically rendered unable to fight back if a race goes awry. That is somewhat untrue. All monsters have a particular rating, reflected in stars, of their overall motivation. Losing a race costs you one of these star points from that particular monster, and if they become completely drained, they're as good as knocked out, more mentally unable to race than physically incapacitated. Thus, you still need to take good care of your team, and take some time to gather up some basic healing items just in case you run into a tight spot and need to grind a little. Speaking of, the overworld is merciful as well, as monsters appear on the map as set encounters who spawn from particular spots and maintain particular patterns, whatever they happen to be, in the form of yellow orbs. Some remain stationary and some will move around, some block particular roads, but regardless, even when defeated, they'll eventually respawn in the same spot with the same AI routine behind it. Thus, if you do end up in a jam, simply paying attention to the world around you usually will be sufficient to beat a hasty retreat whenever required. Thus, you'll race wild monsters to build up your team and level, then participate in the game's fairly light plotline, before taking on bigger challenges at the Continental Race Leagues, where you'll get challenged by the regional champ using a particular local rare monster, and your loop is established. Having said that, were I to find fault with it, it's only a small number of things, really. For starters, the game probably goes a little too easy on players a bit longer than it ought to, really only ramping up during the campaign's twilight hours of game time and the very challenging post-credits content. Also, monsters don't evolve, so don't go into this assuming that they will. Learned that via the scientific method. And I really don't want to say it, but the platformer racing thing, it gets tedious sooner than it should. I hate to say it, as it's a fascinating notion and the dev team behind it clearly had great ideas and did everything they could, but, well, there's a cheat website with experience multiplier codes. Might want to employ them, just being honest. The story isn't anything special, being pretty stock fare for an E for everyone monster game storyline. If you're expecting more than that, you'll probably feel a bit let down. Now, taking all that in mind, how is Monster Racers as a whole? Honestly, I adore this game. All of my complaints are pretty mild, I feel, and while it did take some breaks from the game before coming back and picking up where I left off, I enjoyed my time with the game, and I've never seen a game that was quite as charming with its ideas as this one. This really should be a case study in how to do a different kinds of Mons game way right, and I recommend that, if you pass this one up or simply never heard of it, you should definitely give it a try. It's worth the time investment, and you'll probably crack a smile more than once in your time traveling the world and racing stardom. And that's the final word on this bit of Obscure Gaming. This has been the Hipster Snek, bringing to you an underloved bit of monster gaming goodness. If you liked today's episode, be sure to hit the like button so I know. You can also be sure to get more like this each week by tapping the subscribe and bell icons too, so you'll never miss them as they come out. You can also join me here throughout the week for more, with the Tomodachi Bros podcast episodes being rehomed right here on Channel Snek each Wednesday, and the periodic Snek Talk going live whenever possible on Fridays. Continue joining me here each Monday for more obscure reviews, indie excellence, Snek Tech, and more. And I will see you there. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you're still watching, I just wanted to let you guys know that I wanted to extend a big thank you to all my viewers for helping us recently break the 250 subs milestone. That is crazy to me. The fact that we did it so quickly is all thanks to you and you guys supporting me, and it means the world to me. So I want to give a little something back in return. Between now and the time we hit the 500 subs mark, both on my YouTube discussion page tab and over at my Twitter at Hipster Snek, there is now an open AMA, or Ask Me Anything, where you guys can ask as many questions as you want. When we hit the 500 subs mark, I will sit down, make the video, and answer every question that doesn't get me banned off YouTube. The posts are already there and pinned, awaiting your input. I'm curious to see what you guys are curious about. So I'll see you at the 500 subs mark and with all the answers that you've been craving. And I will see you there.